she whispered. "There's a room under the floor." And no one believed her. But when he finally opened it, what he found turned his empire into a ticking bomb. Rain drummed against the tall windows of the study, steady and relentless, as if the storm outside had settled in for the night. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the kind of scent that belonged to a house built for permanence rather than comfort. Adrian Vale sat at his desk, his shoulders hunched over a spread of reports, the light from his computer screen painting his face in pale blue. His pen scratched across the margin of a contract, while his phone vibrated with incoming messages he had no time to read. It was in this rhythm of silence and storm that Lily Harper appeared. She did not knock. She rarely did, because she had learned long before that knocking meant you were waiting for permission, and permission was not always given. She stood at the edge of the study, her small hands clutching the frayed hem of her sweater, her brown eyes steady and watchful. 4 months in this mansion had taught her where to stand so she was not immediately noticed, and how long to wait before she dared speak. Adrian had taken her in with the kind of decision he made in business, swiftly and logically, after a late-night conversation with a friend about children who never found homes. It had been, in his mind, a choice to do something good, something useful. He had the space, the money, the structure, so why not? But for Lily, living here felt like holding her breath, waiting for the moment someone might say she did not belong after all. She stepped forward slowly, the floor creaking under her socked feet, and tugged lightly at the sleeve of his black sweater. Adrian, without looking up, lifted one hand in the familiar gesture of wait. She stared at his hand for a long moment, weighing whether waiting was safe or dangerous, then tugged again, more firmly this time. His pen stilled, his eyes still fixed on the glowing numbers in front of him. "Lily," he murmured, his tone soft but distracted. "I'll be done in a minute." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear, and whispered words that made the storm outside sound suddenly quiet. "There's a room beneath the floor." For the first time that evening, Adrian froze completely. The kind of stillness that meant the world had shifted in a way too strange to ignore. Slowly, as if turning might shatter the moment, he lifted his gaze from the computer screen and looked at her. She met his eyes with that unblinking seriousness he was only just beginning to recognize, the look of a child who had survived long enough to know when her instincts mattered. "What did you say?" he asked, though he had heard her clearly. Her fingers tapped the wooden boards by the fireplace, tapping once, twice, then she whispered again, even quieter than before. "There's a room beneath the floor. I can hear it at night. It hums." The storm rumbled low outside, and Adrian, for the first time in years, felt unsettled in his own house. Adrian rubbed his temples, the dull ache behind his eyes, a reminder of the 12 hours he had spent locked in conference calls that stretched into arguments. Negotiations always left him drained, and tonight he wanted nothing more than a quiet drink and the comfort of silence. Instead, he found himself staring at Lily, who stood in front of his desk with the kind of seriousness that belonged to someone far older than 8. Her words lingered in the air, unsettling and strange, and though he tried to dismiss them, they seemed to echo inside the walls of his mind. "There's no room under the floor, Lily," he said gently, trying to keep his tone calm, as if reason might soothe her. "This house is old, and old houses make noises. The storm is probably making it worse." Lily didn't flinch. She didn't shuffle her feet or look down at her hands the way most children would when told they were wrong. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly and fixed him with those steady brown eyes, eyes that had already seen too much of the world to be brushed aside by polite words. "It isn't the storm," she whispered. "It's always there, at night when everything is quiet. It hums, like machines, and there are vents in the floor that don't match the others. I've counted them." Adrian forced a tired smile, but something about the way she spoke made the smile feel brittle. "Vents?" he repeated. "Lily, the heating system in this place is complicated. There are old ducts, renovations, things that don't make sense unless you've seen the blueprints. You don't need to worry. But Lily wasn't the kind of child who gave up. She moved closer to the fireplace, her small hand brushing along the wooden boards, tapping them the way she had before. Her voice was steady, almost too calm for her age. "I'm not making it up. I can show you." Adrian exhaled, leaning back in his chair, trying to convince himself this was nothing more than a child's imagination, the same way kids invented monsters under beds or ghosts in closets. Yet, unlike those stories, her words carried weight. Her eyes didn't hold the mischief of a child trying to spook an adult, nor the wide-eyed fear of someone caught in fantasy. They held conviction. "Lily," he said, softer now, "sometimes our minds play tricks, especially in big houses like this. It's easy to think we hear or see things that aren't there." Her small shoulders stiffened at that, and she looked at him with a disappointment he wasn't expecting. "That's what adults always say," she replied quietly. "That we make things up. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw." The words stung more than he wanted to admit. He was used to dismissing problems with logic, used to brushing aside things that didn't fit the data. But something in her voice unsettled him, something that made him wonder if ignoring her might be a mistake. Still, he wasn't ready to believe. Not yet. Lily Harper had learned long ago that the safest way to survive was to watch quietly and remember everything. In the 3 foster homes she had lived in before this one, her silence had been her shield. Words could be twisted, promises could be broken, but if she kept her eyes open and her mouth shut, she could usually predict what was coming. She noticed the way a man's voice changed when he had been drinking, or how a woman's smile never reached her eyes when she was thinking of sending Lily somewhere else. She remembered who slammed doors when they were angry and who only sighed, who counted pills by the sink when they thought no one was looking, who locked their bedroom doors at night. Watching patterns was how she had survived, and it was a skill that had stayed with her even now. Adrian's mansion was nothing like the cramped houses and noisy apartments she had known before, but it too had patterns. She noticed how the lights on the 3rd floor flickered once before turning on, how Josephine, the housekeeper, always opened the kitchen blinds at the same time each morning, how Adrian never touched the piano in the sitting room, even though it was tuned perfectly. She saw how he worked late into the night, shoulders tight, face lit by the cold glow of his computer, and how he forgot his coffee on the desk more often than he drank it. She had been here for 4 months, and she knew the house better than most people who had lived in it for years. But something about the mansion didn't fit. There were places where the air seemed to buzz faintly, places where the floor gave off a hollow sound instead of the solid thud she expected. She had traced the vents with her fingers, following where they led, and some of them didn't connect to anything she could find. At night, when the storm winds were gone and the house was silent, she heard the hum again, faint but steady, rising from beneath the floorboards. It was not the sound of pipes or heating or any of the things adults always said. It was the sound of something hidden, something alive in its own way. She thought about telling Adrian sooner, but she remembered the way other adults had reacted to her in the past. They dismissed her words, or laughed, or told her she was imagining things because children did not understand the world. She had learned to keep what she saw inside until the right moment, until the evidence was too clear to be ignored. That was why she counted the vents, why she listened to the hum night after night, why she memorized the exact places where the sound grew louder when she pressed her ear to the floor. Adrian Vale was not like the other adults she had known, not cruel or careless, but he was distant in a different way, as if he had built walls around himself that even she could not climb. He had taken her in with good intentions, she knew that, but good intentions did not always mean safety. What mattered was whether he would listen when it counted, whether he would see what she saw before it was too late. She watched the house because no one else would, and the house, with its quiet hum and its strange vents, was watching her back. The house had a way of becoming too quiet at night, the kind of silence that made Adrian more aware of his own breathing, of the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, of the faint scrape of branches against the tall windows when the wind shifted. He had stayed in his study long after the storm had moved on, finishing emails he did not want to face in the morning, letting the blue light of his computer screen keep him company. He told himself that Lily's words earlier had been nothing more than a child's imagination, the natural fear of a big house with too many shadows. Yet when the clock struck midnight and the world outside held still, he heard it. At first it was so faint that he thought it might be his tired mind playing tricks. A low vibration, steady and rhythmic, like the purr of an old machine running somewhere in the distance. He paused, leaning back in his chair, holding his breath, as though silence might help him hear more clearly. The sound didn't fade. It was there, under the surface. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. Adrian pushed his chair back and stood slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked around the room. His study was as it always was. The heavy oak shelves lined with books he rarely had time to read. The large desk cluttered with neatly stacked papers. The expensive rug that softened the echo of his footsteps. But the sound wasn't in the air around him. It was below. He crouched near the fireplace where Lily had tapped her small hand earlier, pressing his palm flat against the boards. The vibration was faint but unmistakable, traveling through the wood into his skin. A chill crept up his spine as he realized she had been telling the truth. He moved across the room slowly, listening, testing the floor with each step. The hum grew slightly louder in certain spots, then faded again, as though something hidden beneath the boards was alive, running on its own rhythm. He knelt, pressing his ear against the oak floor, and the sound became clearer, the mechanical thrum of something working tirelessly in the dark where no one was meant to look. For a moment he felt absurd, crouching on the floor of his own study, but the unease in his chest refused to leave. He remembered the certainty in Lily's voice, the way her eyes had held him, steady and unshaken. As she whispered about the room beneath the floor, he had brushed her off, convinced her words were just another ghost of a child's imagination. But now the truth vibrated beneath his hand, undeniable and unnerving. Adrian straightened slowly, his mind racing. His father had built this house decades ago, filling it with luxuries and secrets Adrian had never bothered to question. What if there really was more here than he knew? What if Lily, with her sharp instincts and quiet watching, had uncovered something even he had overlooked? He stood in the silence of his study, the hum beneath his feet filling the air like a hidden heartbeat, and for the first time in years, Adrian felt doubt take root. Adrian stood in the middle of his study, long after the hum beneath the floor faded into the background of his thoughts, steady and constant, like the beat of something waiting to be discovered. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from the decanter on the sideboard and sat in the leather chair by the window, staring out at the dark stretch of lawn. The storm clouds had broken, and the moon cast a pale glow across the estate, highlighting the silhouette of the mansion that had been his since his father's death. It was a house he knew and yet did not know, filled with hallways and rooms that carried a weight of memory he had never wanted to touch. His father had been a man of industry, brilliant and driven, but also closed off in ways Adrian could never explain to outsiders. To the world, Richard Vale was a visionary who built an empire out of steel and silence, his mind sharper than the men who tried to match him. To Adrian, he was a shadow at the head of the table, a voice that gave instructions more than affection, a presence that demanded respect without offering warmth. The mansion had reflected him, grand, beautiful, intimidating, and full of doors that were never opened without permission. The staff who remained spoke of him rarely, but Adrian remembered the whispers that floated through the halls when he was a boy. There had been talk of unfinished projects, of late, night deliveries that vanished into locked rooms, of men in suits who arrived with briefcases and left without them. He used to hear the staff murmur about the East Wing, or the basement, or the parts of the estate that even they were told to leave alone. As a child, he thought it was nothing more than gossip, the way people always invent stories about the powerful. But now, with the sound beneath his feet still ringing in his memory, he wondered if those whispers had been closer to the truth than he had ever wanted to believe. He sipped the whiskey, the burn of it grounding him, and tried to recall how much of the house he had really explored. Despite growing up within these walls, he realized there were entire corners of the estate he had ignored. His father had discouraged curiosity, and Adrian had learned early to focus on what was expected of him. His studies, his preparation to take over the business, his careful following of rules. He had never been the kind of son who wandered into locked doors or questioned where certain hallways led. Even now, as an adult, he had never looked deeper. The mansion had always been just a home on paper, never a place he tried to understand. But Lily's words had forced him to look differently. A child who had been here for only months had seen what he had ignored for decades. She had listened to the hum beneath the floors, noticed the oddities in the vents, and dared to say what he had dismissed. Her whisper had pulled him back into a legacy he had tried to avoid, a legacy of secrets buried under oak boards and old promises. Adrian set down the glass and looked around the study again. The shelves of books his father had chosen, the heavy desk that once belonged to him, the polished floor that hummed with something hidden. The mansion was not just a home. It was a puzzle his father had left behind, one he had never bothered to solve. Now, for the first time, Adrian felt the urge to uncover what had been buried, not just because of curiosity, but because Lily had seen it first. The following morning the storm had cleared, leaving the air sharp with the smell of wet earth and the faint sweetness of the garden roses that clung to the edges of the lawn. Adrian tried to lose himself in the usual rhythm of emails and phone calls, but his thoughts kept circling back to the hum he had heard the night before. He told himself it had been fatigue or imagination, yet the sound had been too precise, too mechanical. Each time he recalled it, he also saw Lily's steady brown eyes, the way she had said it with such certainty, as though she knew she would not be believed, but could not keep silent any longer. By the afternoon she appeared at his study door again. She had no hesitation, no shyness, as if the house had already taught her which spaces belonged to her. Her small hand rested on the frame as she said quietly, "I want to show you something." Adrian set aside his papers and rose, watching as she walked across the room with a surety that unsettled him. She stopped by the fireplace, the same spot where she had tapped before, and crouched down. The rug had been pushed slightly aside, though Adrian had not noticed it until now. She pointed at the edge where the wood met the stone hearth. Dust had gathered in a thin line, but it looked uneven, as though disturbed more often than the rest of the floor. "See here," she said softly. "It collects different. Someone moves this sometimes." He frowned, crouching beside her. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just the residue of years in an old house, but when he studied closer, he saw she was right. The dust near the fireplace seemed fresher, unsettled, and the faintest outline of a square panel revealed itself beneath the film of gray. His father's study had always been immaculate, but this corner looked almost tampered with, as though it hid something no one wanted found. Lily's small fist tapped against the board. The sound that came back was not the solid thud of oak he expected, but a hollow echo that carried beneath the surface. Adrian froze, his skin crawling as though something had reached up from the floor and touched him. The noise was soft, but undeniable, the kind of sound that belonged to empty space, not solid ground. "You hear it?" she whispered, watching his face. Adrian nodded slowly, his throat tight. He pressed his hand against the wood and knocked once himself. The echo returned, hollow and strange, vibrating faintly through the floor into his palm. Every inch of his upbringing told him this was impossible, that there should be nothing beneath his study except solid stone foundation. Yet the evidence hummed back at him in the air. For years he had walked this room with blind certainty, never questioning the surface beneath his feet. Now, crouched beside a child who had only been here for months, he felt the weight of every unanswered question his father had left behind. He stared at the floor, at the faint lines in the dust, and realized that the mansion had been holding its secrets just out of reach, waiting for someone bold enough to listen. The study felt colder than usual, though the fire had been lit only an hour ago. Adrian stood beside Lily, staring at the faint square hidden beneath the layer of dust, his pulse drumming in his ears. For a long moment he considered walking away, telling himself it was nothing. But the hollow echo still rang in his mind. He had built his career on evidence, on proof and precision, and now the proof lay at his feet in the quiet insistence of a child who had refused to be ignored. "Help me with the rug," he said finally, his voice low and uneven. Lily's eyes lit with something between triumph and relief as she bent down beside him. Together they pulled at the heavy fabric, rolling it back from the fireplace until the oak floor was bare. Dust lifted in the air, dancing in the light from the tall windows. Adrian's hand moved across the wood, his fingertips brushing against the faint groove that outlined the hidden panel. "There," Lily whispered, pointing. At first he thought she was mistaken, but then his fingers caught on a tiny indentation, no bigger than the edge of a coin. He pressed lightly, and a small brass latch revealed itself from beneath the wood. The sight of it made his breath catch in his throat. This was not the creak of old boards or the hum of pipes. This was deliberate, designed, built into the house like a secret no one was meant to uncover. Adrian sat back on his heels, staring at it. His hands trembled, and he tried to still them by curling them into fists. He thought of his father, the closed doors, the whispered conversations, the rules about where he could and could not go. As a boy, he had obeyed. As a man, he had inherited without question. And now, an 8-year-old had forced him to see what he had ignored all his life. Lily reached out as if to touch the latch, but he caught her wrist gently. "Not yet," he said, his voice tight. Her eyes met his, calm and steady. "You believe me now." It wasn't a question. He swallowed hard, nodding once. The truth was undeniable, sitting there in the open, gleaming faintly under years of dust. He had dismissed her, convinced himself it was imagination, and yet she had been right. The house was hiding something. He pressed the latch, half afraid of what it might reveal, half afraid it would do nothing at all. There was a faint click, a sound so soft he almost thought he imagined it. The outline of the square shifted slightly, as though the floor itself had taken a breath. He didn't open it, not yet, but the knowledge that it could open made his heart pound harder. He sat back, running a hand through his hair, trying to calm the rush of thoughts. Lily's small face was tilted toward him, waiting for what he would do next. For the first time in years, Adrian felt the weight of not just his own choices, but the trust of someone else, someone who needed him to see what she saw. "Yes," he whispered, his voice rough with certainty. "You were right." The moment the latch gave way and the square of floor shifted, Adrian felt the weight of years pressing against his chest. With a slow push, he lifted the panel, and the hinges groaned as though they had not been moved in decades. Dust spilled into the air, and the smell that rose up was sharp and metallic, heavy with a dampness that clung to his throat. Beneath the opening stretched a narrow staircase, steep and made of old iron, the steps vanishing into a darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the room above. Lily leaned forward, her face pale in the glow of the study lamps, but her eyes shone with the steady confidence of someone who had known all along. She didn't flinch at the smell or the sight of the shadows waiting below. Instead, she gripped the edge of the opening as if she had found exactly what she expected. Adrian, however, felt his stomach tighten with unease. Every instinct told him to close the latch, to pretend they had never found it, but something stronger pushed him forward. The need to know, the need to face what his father had left buried. "Stay here," he said, though his voice carried little conviction. Lily shook her head, her hair brushing her shoulders. "I'm coming. You won't see what I see if I don't." The words unsettled him, but before he could argue, She had already placed one small foot on the first step. Adrian swore under his breath, and followed, reaching for the flashlight he kept in the drawer of his desk. The beam cut into the dark, revealing walls lined with stone and iron, each step coated in dust that puffed up as they moved. The sound of their descent echoed unnaturally, magnified by the narrow space. The hum Lily had spoken of now louder, vibrating faintly through the rail. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, stale and unmoving, and Adrian could taste the tang of rust on his tongue. He reached instinctively to steady Lily with his free hand, his grip tight on her shoulder as though holding on to her could anchor him. She didn't resist, didn't even seem afraid, her small frame moving with the calm steadiness of someone who had lived with shadows long before this night. At the bottom of the staircase, they stepped onto solid ground, the light spilling into a low-ceilinged chamber. The room was larger than Adrian expected, stretching into corners he could not yet see. The floor scattered with old cables, metal crates, and the skeletons of machines long abandoned. The hum was louder here, constant, pulsing from somewhere deeper inside. Adrian's throat tightened as he swept the light across the walls. Diagrams and yellowed papers clung to corkboards, curling at the edges with age. Dust coated everything, but beneath it all was purpose, the unmistakable presence of a place designed to be hidden. Lily's hand slipped into his, her small fingers warm against his trembling ones. She whispered only once, her voice steady in the silence that followed. "I told you." Adrian lifted the beam of his flashlight higher, and the darkness pulled back just enough for him to see the size of the chamber they had stepped into. The air was heavy and stale, thick with the metallic bite of old machinery. The hum was louder now, surrounding them, not just from one corner but from everywhere, as though the very walls were alive. As his eyes adjusted, he realized the faint glow in the distance was not a trick of his light, but the steady pulse of screens that still burned after all these years. He moved forward cautiously, each step crunching over dust and loose wires, his heart beating with the rhythm of the machines. Rows of tall servers rose from the floor like iron trees, their faces blinking with tiny red and green lights that looked impossibly alive for equipment so old. The cables snaked across the ground in tangled lines, connecting to consoles covered in buttons and dials that seemed decades out of date, yet still functional. It was not an abandoned basement, not a forgotten corner of the estate. It was a system still breathing, still waiting. Lily walked beside him, her hand still gripping his tightly, but her face was turned toward the glow. She was not afraid, only curious, her eyes wide as the light of the monitors reflected in them. Adrian stopped in front of one of the consoles, brushing a thick layer of dust from the surface with the sleeve of his jacket. Beneath it, the glass screen shone a pale blue, running a stream of code that flickered down endlessly. He felt a jolt of recognition. These were programs his father had once spoken about, in vague, guarded terms, experiments in surveillance, prediction, and control. He had dismissed them as grand ideas that would never leave the notebooks where his father scribbled late at night. But here they were, alive, functioning in silence beneath his home. Lily tugged his hand gently, pointing to another corner where larger monitors lined the wall. He turned his light toward them, and his throat tightened. The screens displayed shifting maps, data streams, and what looked like recorded conversations, each marked with timestamps that went back years. Some of the dates were so recent they made his skin crawl. Lily's small voice broke the silence. "It feels like someone's still here." The words settled like a stone in Adrian's stomach. He wanted to dismiss them, to tell her that this was nothing but the leftover work of a man long dead. But the screens told a different story. They were too alive, too precise, the recent timestamps too deliberate. Someone had been using this place. Someone who knew about the hidden chamber and its secrets. Adrian's hands shook as he reached out and pressed a key on the nearest console. The response was immediate, the screen flashing brighter, a hum deepening, as if the system had been waiting for his touch. Lily gasped softly, her grip tightening on his arm. He could not look away from the glowing monitors, could not silence the thought now taking root. His father's legacy had not ended with his death. It was still running, still active, and now that he had opened the door, it was awake again. Adrian stood frozen in front of the glowing monitors, the faint blue light flickering across his face, making him look almost ghost-like in the dim chamber. He had seen drawings like these before, rough sketches in the margins of his father's notebooks, cryptic phrases scattered across papers Adrian had once tried to read as a boy, but had never understood. Now, standing in this secret room, he realized they had not been theories or idle scribbles. His father had built them. Every screen, every humming server, every blinking light was proof that Richard Vale's mind had gone further than anyone had imagined. He stepped closer to one of the larger monitors, brushing dust from the edge, and the faint lines of code scrolled down faster than he could follow. Patterns shifted across maps, numbers reorganized themselves, predictions appeared in neat columns beside names and dates. It was surveillance, but not in the simple way Adrian's own cybersecurity company managed. This was something deeper, something invasive. He saw conversations transcribed with eerie precision, not just phone calls but private exchanges, whispers from inside boardrooms and homes. It was as if his father had been listening to the world through hidden channels, gathering information long after he had withdrawn from public life. The hum beneath their feet grew steadier, a low and endless rhythm. Adrian turned his light toward the corner of the room and saw the bulky frame of a generator, old but still running. Its casing was scratched and rusted, but the cables connected to it fed the entire network of machines around them. The truth struck him with a cold weight. The sound Lily had heard in the nights, the vibration that had unsettled her, was the heartbeat of a machine his father had never turned off. He took a step back, his chest tightening. Memories came in fragments, the way his father had locked his study door, the late-night visitors who never stayed long, the instructions never to wander certain halls. As a boy, he had obeyed, believing it was easier not to ask questions, and as a man he had inherited the house without caring what secrets it held. Only now did he realize how much of his father still lingered here, not in photographs or heirlooms, but in the quiet machinery that hummed endlessly in the dark. Lily's hand slipped into his. He looked down at her, startled by the calm expression on her face. "You knew," he said softly. "I felt it," she answered. "It's like the house was holding its breath." Her words cut deeper than she could have known. He saw his father in every blinking light, every line of code, a ghost not gone but waiting, and it unsettled him more than any haunting could have. Richard Vale had built this chamber as more than a secret. It was a legacy of control, a system designed to watch and predict, something meant to outlive him. And now it was Adrian who stood at the center of it, facing the truth he had ignored for too long. The hum droned on, patient and endless, as if reminding him that his father's work had never truly died. Adrian's fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain if pressing another key would reveal more truth than he was ready to face. The screen in front of him shifted with a faint click, rows of folders opening like doors in a hallway that stretched endlessly. Each one was labeled with precise dates, going back years, farther than Adrian expected. His pulse quickened as he scrolled, his name appearing again and again in neat digital script, side by side with words like study, conference, and dining room. He opened one at random, and the sound of his own voice filled the chamber. It was a recording from nearly 10 years ago, his tone younger, sharper, filled with ambition as he spoke to investors about his first company. He remembered that meeting clearly, remembered the pressure of convincing men twice his age to trust him. What he did not remember was a microphone. And yet here his words were, captured and preserved, hidden in a chamber he had never known existed. Another file played a conversation from just last year, one he had held over the phone in this very study. The recording was crystal clear, as if whoever had captured it had been sitting right beside him. Adrian's chest tightened, his gaze darting around the chamber as though he might see the wires and devices that had fed these conversations into his father's secret system. Lily stood close to him, her eyes wide, her head tilted as she listened. She did not seem shocked in the way a child might be, not frightened, but watchful, the way she always was when she pieced things together. "He was listening," she said simply. Adrian swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Not just listening," he murmured. He clicked another file, and this time it was not him but his late mother's voice, soft and tired, reading to him when he was a boy. The sound pierced deeper than he expected, the words carrying the weight of a memory he had not touched in years. He froze, staring at the screen as the recording played on, realizing that even the most private moments had been captured. He pressed on, opening folder after folder, each revealing whispers from rooms above, dinner conversations with friends, arguments with business partners, even solitary moments when he had thought himself alone. His father had not only monitored the world beyond these walls, he had monitored his own family. The thought made Adrian's stomach twist. The strangest part was the dates. They stretched not only to the years before his father's death, but continued long after. Some files were as recent as last month. His hand trembled on the mouse as the truth crashed over him. His father had not only built the system, someone had kept it alive. Someone had been listening all this time. The chamber felt smaller, the air heavier. Adrian shut the screen with a quick motion, his heart racing. He could feel Lily's gaze on him, steady and knowing. She did not need to speak the words, because he was already thinking them. The house had never been silent. It had been watching, recording, and remembering, and he had never known. Josephine entered the study quietly, as she always did, her soft steps barely stirring the air. Adrian and Lily were still seated near the open floor panel, the faint glow from below casting long shadows against the walls. Adrian's face was pale, his jaw tight, and Lily leaned against the desk as though she had been waiting for someone to say what she already knew. Josephine paused in the doorway, her sharp eyes narrowing. Then she stepped further inside, wiping her hands on her apron, though there was nothing on them. "I wondered when you would find it," she said gently. Adrian looked up, startled. "You knew?" Her lips pressed together before she gave a small nod. "Not everything, not what it truly was, but I suspected. This house has never been what it seemed, Mr. Vale. Not when your father was alive, and not after." Adrian pushed a hand through his hair, frustration edging his voice. "Why didn't you say something?" Josephine's gaze moved to Lily first, as if measuring whether the child should hear the truth. But Lily did not flinch. She stood straighter, watching with the same alertness that had guided them this far. Josephine sighed, settling into the chair near the fireplace. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, her voice steady, though her words carried the weight of memory. "I was hired more than 30 years ago, before you were born. Your father was a difficult man, but brilliant. He built things most of us could not understand, and he trusted very few. Even his wife was kept at a distance when it came to his work. But I was here, always here, and I saw the comings and goings he thought no one noticed." Adrian leaned forward, his chest tightening. "What kind of comings and goings?" "Strangers," she answered simply. "Men in suits, women with briefcases. They came late, always after dark. They never stayed long, and they never spoke to the rest of us. I would hear the front door open long after the house was quiet, and sometimes I saw lights glowing beneath the cracks of locked doors. Your father had a way of making everyone believe those spaces were not theirs to enter. Even I respected those rules. But rules do not hide everything. I smelled the chemicals. I heard the generators. I knew there was something below these floors." Adrian's throat felt dry. "And you never told me." Her eyes softened with something like regret. "You were a boy, Adrian. You followed your father without question, and when you grew, you became a man who did not look back. I thought perhaps you wanted it that way. And when he passed, I believed the secrets would die with him, but when I heard the hum still running at night, I realized I had been wrong. Lily spoke then, her voice quiet but cutting through the silence. He didn't let anyone close, but the house kept his secrets anyway. Josephine gave her a small, approving nod. The house remembers. I only saw glimpses. You have seen what lies beneath. Perhaps it was always meant to be you. Adrian stared at the open panel, the faint breath of cold air rising from it, and felt the truth press harder against him. His father's shadow still lingered, carried by machines, and whispered by those who had been forced to live with them. Adrian returned to the glowing monitors with Josephine and Lily standing close behind, his heart pounding as he scrolled through the files that seemed to multiply the deeper he went. At first the folders had carried his name, then his mother's, then quiet conversations from the house. But now he saw something that made the blood drain from his face. There were names he recognized instantly. Men and women who sat at the boardroom table with him, people he trusted to guide his company. Their names appeared beside dates, meeting times, and fragments of conversations that should never have been recorded. He clicked one file at random, and the screen filled with a transcript of a meeting from 3 months earlier. He remembered that day, remembered sitting at the long glass table in the downtown office, discussing a merger that had taken months to negotiate. What stunned him was that the transcript did not just summarize, it captured every word, every pause, every glance that shifted the balance of power in the room. Someone had been watching. Someone had been feeding off the secret system his father left behind, and using it to stay one step ahead. Adrian's jaw clenched as he opened another file, then another. Each one was the same. Discussions that were supposed to be confidential, private deals whispered in corners, even strategy calls that had been held behind closed doors. All of it was here, neatly catalogued, like prey marked by a hunter. His father had designed a network to watch and predict, but someone had taken it further. This was not the cold curiosity of a reclusive man experimenting with technology. This was active. This was deliberate. Lily leaned closer, her small face lit by the cold glow of the screen. "They've been using it," she said quietly. "Not your father. Someone else." Josephine folded her hands tightly in front of her. "You're bored," she said, her voice low and certain. "They have always known more than they should. I have seen the way they arrive already confident of outcomes, as though they had the answers before the questions were asked." Adrian thought back to moments he had ignored, moments that seemed odd but harmless. A vote that shifted too quickly in favor of a rival proposal. A competitor who appeared with a counter offer that mirrored his own projections almost word for word. A partner who had insisted on terms that only someone with private knowledge of his schedule could demand. He had dismissed each incident, telling himself it was coincidence, the natural ebb and flow of business. But the truth glared at him now from the screens. These were not accidents. They were patterns of betrayal, strung together by the hidden legacy of a man who had built a system to watch everything. His hands shook as he reached for another file, afraid of whose name he might see next. Betrayal carried its own sting, but betrayal from those seated closest to him would destroy more than his company. It would destroy the trust that had held his empire together. The hum of the generator echoed through the chamber, steady and cruel, as though reminding him that this had been running for years while he remained blind. Adrian scrolled through the endless folders, his eyes burning from the pale glow of the monitors. But it was Lily who leaned in closer, her small fingers resting against the edge of the desk, as though she were piecing together a puzzle only she could see. Her gaze darted over the columns of dates and times, lingering on certain numbers, and he realized she was not just looking, she was noticing. She tapped the screen gently, her voice quiet but certain. "These aren't old," she said. Adrian frowned, shaking his head. "What do you mean? Most of these records go back decades. They're from my father's time." Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to a row of dates, highlighted in the corner of the file directory. "That one," she whispered. "It says 4 days ago. And that one, last Tuesday. Look, Some of them are marked this morning. He leaned closer, his pulse quickening. At first he thought she was mistaken, that maybe the system had glitched, or the clock on the machine had been wrong, but the timestamps were clear and undeniable. They didn't just belong to his father's era, they belonged to now. Lily's brow furrowed as she scrolled with quick, steady motions. These aren't just old recordings stored away. Someone is still coming here. They're listening, they're updating the files, maybe even recording new ones. Her small finger traced down a column, stopping on the one that made her lips press into a thin line. This one is from yesterday. It's the kitchen. It's us. Adrian's stomach dropped. He clicked the file, and his own voice filled the chamber. Soft, distracted, speaking to Lily about breakfast, about how she needed to leave for school. Every word they had said was captured in chilling clarity. His hand clenched around the edge of the desk as he listened to the intimate details of their morning. Details no one should have heard. Josephine's face had gone pale. "So, someone has been inside this house," she whispered. "They know this room. They know the system. And they're still using it." The air felt heavier. The hum of the generator, now menacing rather than steady. Adrian looked around the chamber, the blinking lights suddenly seeming like 1,000 eyes. He thought about the files containing boardroom conversations, about the betrayals he had just uncovered, and a cold realization crept into his mind. This was not a relic. This was a weapon, and someone had been holding it against him while he slept above, unaware. Lily's eyes lifted to his, steady and unafraid. "It wasn't your father. Not anymore. Someone else has the key." Her words carried the weight of truth, and Adrian could not ignore them. She had seen what he had overlooked. Her instincts had guided them this far, and now those instincts told him they were not alone in this discovery. Somewhere, perhaps within his own circle, someone else knew the secrets buried beneath his floors. The chamber had grown too quiet. The hum of the generator filled the silence, steady and low. But there was something different in the air, a tension that pressed down on Adrian's chest. He had just closed another file when Lily froze beside him, her head tilting toward the staircase. Her small hand clutched his sleeve, her eyes wide but not panicked. She whispered one word that barely carried over the hum. "Listen." Adrian held his breath. At first he heard nothing, only the buzz of the servers and the faint ticking of an old machine in the corner. Then it came. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the study above them. The sound of weight pressing into the oak floorboards, the kind of sound that could not be mistaken for settling wood. Someone was in the house. He reached for the flashlight instinctively, then stopped, realizing that even the smallest glow might betray them. Instead, he drew Lily back into the corner of the chamber, away from the staircase. Josephine's earlier words echoed in his head. Someone else had known about this place. Someone else had been using it. And now, they were here. The footsteps moved again, measured and cautious, as though the intruder knew exactly where to go. A faint creak followed, the sound of weight shifting near the fireplace. Adrian's throat tightened. Whoever it was had found the latch. The hinges groaned faintly as the panel opened, and a shaft of light spilled down the narrow staircase. Dust swirled in the beam, drifting like pale smoke. Adrian pressed Lily closer against the cold wall, his arm wrapped protectively around her. He could feel her small heartbeat racing, but her face stayed steady, her eyes fixed on the faint glow as if waiting for what would come next. A figure began to descend. At first only a shadow stretched down the wall, long and crooked in the shifting light. Then came the faint outline of shoes on iron steps, the sound of careful movements that betrayed knowledge of the place. This was not someone stumbling into the chamber by accident. This was someone who had been here before. Adrian's palms were damp, his breath shallow, but he stayed still. The intruder carried a small lantern, its light faint, but enough to spill across the edge of the room. Adrian and Lily sank deeper into the shadows, hidden behind the tall servers. From there he watched, his heart pounding as the figure stepped off the last stair and into the chamber, turning slowly, as if inspecting what was already familiar. The lantern revealed a face Adrian recognized, though he wished he didn't. The sight of him twisted Adrian's gut, sending a surge of betrayal through his veins. But he forced himself silent, holding Lily close as the man moved further into the chamber, confident, assured, like someone who believed they were alone. Adrian's mind raced, his thoughts burning with the certainty that nothing would ever be the same after this night. The lantern's glow shifted across the walls, stretching the shadow of the intruder until it loomed over the chamber, like a figure from some half-forgotten nightmare. Adrian kept Lily close, his arm firm around her shoulders, his body tense against the chill of betrayal, already crawling up his spine. When the figure turned, the light catching his face, the truth settled with brutal clarity. It was Marcus Hale. Adrian's breath caught. Marcus, the man who had sat beside him in countless meetings, the advisor he had trusted since the early days of his company, the voice of calm reason during moments of doubt. Marcus had been there when investors pulled out, when competitors circled like wolves, when Adrian doubted himself most. And now, here he was, moving through the hidden chamber as though it belonged to him. Marcus set the lantern on a console and tapped at the keys with ease, his expression focused. The screens brightened, rows of data spilling across them. He leaned in, scanning numbers and files, his lips curling into the faintest smile. Adrian watched in silence, his pulse drumming so loud he feared it would give them away. "Stock movements look good," Marcus muttered under his breath, his voice low but clear in the chamber. "Vale Tech weakens, competitors rise. Just a few more adjustments." The words hit Adrian like blows. He realized now how carefully Marcus had been working, feeding on the very system his father had left behind. The hidden surveillance had given Marcus every advantage. He had spied on Adrian's private conversations, tracked deals before they were signed, and manipulated stock prices to his own benefit. Lily's hand tightened around Adrian's sleeve. She looked up at him with wide eyes that asked the question he couldn't bring himself to voice. "Why?" Marcus continued his work, pulling open files with his practiced hands. "Sabotage is cleaner when it looks natural," he whispered, almost to himself. "Push one number, leak one conversation, and the board turns exactly where I want them. They never suspect." He chuckled softly, the sound hollow and cruel. Adrian Vale, the genius investor, undone by his own father's legacy. Adrian's throat tightened. Rage fought with disbelief inside him. He thought back to every time Marcus had warned him against a deal that later collapsed, every time Marcus had predicted a competitor's move with uncanny accuracy, every time Marcus had steered him away from what should have been a success. It had all been orchestrated, calculated with the precision of someone who could see everything from the shadows. The room felt colder as Adrian realized the depth of betrayal. Marcus had not just used the system to profit, he had used it to destroy. Every sabotage, every whisper of failure, had been deliberate. And Adrian, blind to the hum beneath his own floors, had allowed it. Marcus leaned back in the chair, the glow of the screens reflecting in his eyes. "Another week," he murmured, "and the company will fall right into Apex's hands. All thanks to a man too blind to see the floor beneath his feet." Adrian's fists clenched. Lily's gaze held steady. In the silence of that hidden room, betrayal had revealed its face, and Adrian knew nothing would ever be the same again. Marcus's voice still echoed in Adrian's ears long after the man left the chamber that night. The calm certainty with which he had spoken, the smugness in every word, replayed again and again. Adrian stood frozen in the dark until the last trace of Marcus's lantern faded up the stairs. Only then did he let out the breath he had been holding, his chest tight with fury and disbelief. Lily stood beside him, small and steady, her eyes fierce. She whispered what he already knew. "We can stop him." The following hours were filled with silence and urgency. Adrian copied files from the machines, his hands shaking as he transferred data onto secure drives. Lily guided him, pointing to the folders marked most recently, the ones with Marcus's fingerprints all over them. Together they gathered recordings of board meetings, transcripts of manipulated deals, even files showing money wired from shell companies tied to competitors. Every keystroke felt like a step closer to justice, but also a reminder of how deep the betrayal had run. By dawn, Adrian made the call he had dreaded but knew was necessary. He contacted a trusted contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, someone who had once helped him secure patents from overseas theft. His voice was steady, but his heart raced as he explained the system hidden beneath his home, the files they had uncovered, the betrayal of Marcus Hale. Hours later, black SUVs rolled up the long drive of the Vale estate, their arrival quiet but powerful, as if the storm of truth had come at last. The raid unfolded swiftly. Agents moved through the mansion with practiced steps, their presence filling the air with authority. Down in the chamber, they examined the servers, their faces grave as they realized the scope of what had been built and exploited. Adrian stood with them, but it was Lily who held their attention. She sat at the console, small hands moving across the keyboard with a confidence that surprised even the seasoned investigators. She pointed to timestamps, showed them how the files had been altered, how Marcus had accessed the system again and again. Her voice was calm, her explanations clear, as though she had spent her whole life preparing for this one moment. When Marcus arrived later that morning, confident and unsuspecting, the sight of the agents waiting for him stripped the color from his face. He tried to protest, to bluff his way free, but the evidence was overwhelming. The files bore his fingerprints, his voice filled the recordings, his name appeared in the ledgers of false accounts. Within minutes, the man who had manipulated from the shadows was in handcuffs, led out of the mansion he thought he controlled. Adrian watched him go, the weight of betrayal heavy but no longer suffocating. Marcus's empire of deception crumbled in front of him, collapsing not with noise but with certainty, the kind that comes when truth cannot be denied. Later, in a quiet room filled with agents and lawyers, Lily gave her testimony. She sat straight, backed, her voice unwavering, recounting what she had seen and heard, how she had traced the signals, how she had discovered the truth no one else would believe. Every word was sharp, fearless, and true. She was only 8, yet she spoke with the clarity of someone who had lived through storms most adults could not endure. When she finished, the room was silent. An agent leaned forward, his expression softened by respect. "Without her," he said, "we might never have uncovered this." Adrian looked at Lily then, and for the first time he saw not just the child he had brought into his home, but the force she had become, the reason his world still stood. In her quiet courage, she had turned betrayal into justice, and he knew she had saved far more than just him. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that night slowly faded into memory, though its weight still lingered in the walls of the mansion. The raid, the arrests, the endless meetings with lawyers and agents had filled the days that followed. But beneath all the chaos, something steady had begun to take root. For the first time in years, Adrian felt his house was his own, not a stage for someone else's secrets. And for the first time since Lily had arrived, the air between them was no longer filled with distance. On a clear morning, he stood with her in the courthouse, the sound of papers shuffling and pens scratching faintly around them. The judge's voice was calm, reading the decree that made what both of them already knew the official. Lily Harper was now Lily Vale. She glanced up at him when the words were spoken, her lips pressing into the smallest of smiles, as if daring to believe that permanence could belong to her. Adrian squeezed her hand, and for the first time, she did not hesitate to squeeze back. The days that followed carried a lighter rhythm. Rooms that once felt haunted by whispers now rang with the sound of voices and laughter, not loud or careless, but real. Josephine moved through the house with a brighter step, often finding Lily in the kitchen, sketching designs on scraps of paper, or perched in the study with a tablet in hand, mapping signals the way some children mapped constellations. Adrian found himself watching her often, struck by how naturally she had fit into the life he had never realized was incomplete. The chamber beneath the floor was no longer a place of dread. With the help of trusted engineers, Adrian stripped out the lingering remains of his father's secrets, dismantling the surveillance and locking away its files for the authorities. The generator still hummed, but now it powered something different. Together, he and Lily reimagined the space, turning its shadows into possibility. Clean white lights replaced the dim glow, old servers gave way to new workstations, and the walls that once carried whispers now held blueprints and sketches for projects of their own. It was no longer a room of betrayal. It was a lab for creation. On the first evening after the transformation, Adrian led Lily down the staircase again. She paused at the bottom, her eyes widening at the sight of the chamber reborn. Where once she had whispered of ghosts, she now stood in a space alive with promise. He guided her to a corner where a sleek workstation had been assembled, the desk fitted with tools and monitors suited for someone who had already proven her sharpness. "This is yours," he said, his voice softer than he meant it to be, "for the girl who saw what I couldn't." Lily reached out, touching the smooth surface, with a care that seemed reverent. She looked at him, her eyes shining not with surprise but with something deeper, recognition. For the first time she did not seem like a guest or a child waiting to be sent away. She seemed like what she was now, his daughter. Adrian felt the truth settle in his chest as he watched her settle into her chair. They were no longer bound by duty or chance. They were no longer strangers crossing paths in a house filled with silence. They were a family, forged not in ease but in struggle, built on the simple power of trust finally given and finally earned. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.